Welcome back to another episode of the DailyFlip podcast. All right, so obviously this part, I normally go on about the articles that we're going to read today. A few announcements. Obviously, I stopped saying the number. We're going to stop saying the number. It will still be numbered in the title, don't you worry. I'm just going to stop saying the number as the intro. We've gotten past 300 episodes. At this point, I don't really think anybody cares about the number, personally. Second off, I want to thank everybody who's been here along the way. We have released a new show. It's going to come out on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's going to cover international news. And in honor of that, we're going to do a more international focus while still tying back to America here today. It's going to be about 20 minutes rather than 30 minutes altogether, so that you can spend the other 10 minutes going over and listening to the new podcast, which is 6 and 6. It will show up in the feed just like the normal videos that get posted. It will show up in the RSS feed with nothing there to interrupt it, and you can just keep on going through your day. Nothing's really changing there. We're still going to keep all the content relatively the same over here, a little bit more U.S. focused, especially as we go into the election. But that's enough ranting on that one. Thanks for joining. Now let's jump into our first set of articles, which is going to be talking about Elon Musk and the attacks that are coming from some European officials, both in the EU and in the UK. Now, there's no dismissing that Elon Musk is very, very controversial. So when he highlights stories that may not be favorable to either of the governments there, especially in the UK right now, and he's hosting, or in the past tense, he hosted a Twitter Spaces, or X Spaces, but Twitter Spaces with Donald Trump, you know that he is going to catch some flack for that. So our first article is going to come from Just the News. UK police chief suggests arresting Elon Musk for highlighting the riots, British riots. So when you hear this sort of thing, I don't know if people truly understand the difference between our country here in America and the UK and Europe. So here in America, we have free speech. It is written into our Constitution that this is something that the government cannot abridge. Obviously, in private circumstances, you can actually be contracted to have certain morality clauses or speech clauses in contracts where your employer can say, hey, we don't want these kind of words said here. You could be fired because of it, so on and so forth. In your own private setting, if you're at somebody's house and you say something they don't like, if it's their private property, they could very well throw you off. But the government cannot abridge that right, period, full stop. Over in other countries, it's very different. And I even made statements about this when I was asked, hey, do you want to do a school abroad sort of experience, maybe in England, because I had previously gone to England. I was very fortunate as a little school trip, and I really enjoyed the country. And they always ask, well, maybe you want to go to Germany, you want to go to France. And I would always respond, no, I don't want to, because there's the possibility that I say something that is out of line, that doesn't, it doesn't even compartmentalize in my brain that, oh, this is a different culture, that this thing isn't acceptable, I don't know yet, and I get told off for it. There's a possible repercussions that I can't necessarily foresee coming, but also, for all I know, I said something so long ago that was totally outside the Overton window, and somehow people find out about it and they do not enjoy it whatsoever over there, and I can get lambasted for it and possibly arrested. And I know that sounds super outlandish, and honestly, I didn't really have anything to worry about, but my point was always, I don't want to go somewhere where the amendment or the First Amendment is not something that is a fundamental right within the governance structure of the country. And that's obviously very, very stupid in pure concept, being that I wouldn't be able to travel basically anywhere around the world, but especially to learn to do a travel abroad experience and to be in an educational setting where you're meant to question the narratives that are being told to you. You're meant to criticize, you're meant to kind of pick apart what you're learning and actually build it back together and make sure that it is coherent with your worldview, that it makes sense. there's always a possibility that you say something out of turn when questioning the people that are in authority there. And I didn't want to run that risk. And also, it was a little bit of protest, which is no, I'm not going to go learn in a country where you can't even say certain things. And now we see examples of it here with the government of the UK going after people online, basically saying that, hey, anything you say online, not necessarily free speech, you can't be prosecuted for it. And this is obviously, this affects way more people on the ground, and it affects just the average everyday person in the UK more than it affects Elon Musk. This is just bloviating. But the article and the topic highlights the fact that this is a problem. So I'm not trying to say, oh, Elon Musk is persecuted, because at the end of the day, he's one of the richest men in the world. He owns the X platform. He can say whatever he wants on there. If he wants to make restrictions for the UK, for Europe, so that they continue to operate in those countries, he can do whatever he wants. And there are actual UK citizens that have to deal with the fact that their government will shut them down and will arrest them for saying things that are unpopular or could, quote unquote, disturb the peace, even though it could be a legitimate criticism of the government and how they're handling certain activities and events that are happening within their country. So I'm not trying to say, oh, look at Elon Musk, poor Elon Musk. No, I understand that there are people within the country that are dealing with the actual repercussions of this terrible, terrible policy and the suppression of dissent. And I want to highlight that. I want to make sure that I start, before going into this, making sure that anybody who doesn't already know that, who doesn't understand how blessed you are to live in a country where, yes, speech can still be controlled to some degree. There's shadow banning. There's governments coming in and telling social media companies this isn't allowed. There's the government bureaucrats having certain trainings required for you to go in to operate and be a contractor with the United States government, even though I do hear that that's not actually enforced as much as they would like you to think, maybe a little bit more virtue signaling. I understand we're not perfect, and we always have to defend this right, but in comparatively to other countries, we are much better off, and I want to highlight that before we get into this, because this probably sounds very foreign to a lot of people. Quote, UK Police Chief Mark Rowley suggested he is willing to arrest U.S. citizen Elon Musk because Musk highlighted extreme violence and riots by Muslim gangs in England. The British Met Police Commissioner pledged that, quote, whether you're in this country committing crimes on the streets or committing crimes from further afield online, we will come after you, end quote. And, okay, first off, is he trying? Okay, I want to ask a question. Is he trying to actually compare the people that are on the streets? And obviously, I understand. I have a different perspective because I'm an American. I'm not a British citizen. I'm not used to the way that they govern. I don't have the same value system in place. Understood. But is he actually trying to compare people that are on the streets rioting, destroying private and public property, with people that are pointing it out and using their ability to speak freely on the internet? I understand in the United States we can speak freely, over there we can't, but even then, comparing people that are doing the terrible action and then pointing out the terrible action, whether they're praising or criticizing it, really? You're going to compare those two people? I just think that's a little bit insane. And maybe that should actually be the underlying story rather than the free speech issue, but I really wanted to focus on the free speech issue, especially because Elon Musk is, at least now on one side of the aisle, idolized as a free speech warrior. So it actually kind of connotes with the character that he's building for himself, which is, well, screw your dumb laws. We're not going to sit here and silence ourselves just because you want me to. So he has one of the largest platforms now, and he says he's a free speech absolutist, so maybe he's going to put out some more taunting tweets and risk having to go to England for a shareholder meeting or something like that, or maybe even a investment meeting in the capital of London. He may have to get like an embassy car so he can't be arrested, but even then, I don't know if it would necessarily work out. Quote, Raleigh made this conversational comment during UK protests and riots, quote, in response to the killing of 3 young girls during a mass stabbing attack that left several more injured. Quote, you can be guilty of offense of incitement and stirring up racial hatred, Raleigh said, end quote. And that is a lot of where the free speech laws end up, especially within the UK, but also within the European Union, especially think Germany. I've highlighted this before on the podcast, how they have hate speech laws. And That sounds extremely, extremely noble on its face. We do not want people using hateful language and going out there and trying to incite violence with it. But incitement's always been extremely tricky, and trying to blur the lines between hateful words and incitement, it goes down an even further path that starts to limit what people are allowed to say in the public, because guess what? What one person thinks is normal and just a matter of fact, other people may think is hateful or may harm them. They don't want to hear the facts, they can't handle the facts, or not even necessarily facts, but maybe somebody else's perception of them is hurtful to their own ego and they can't handle it, and then they may call it hateful speech. And you can see here where in these systems, you no longer leave the question up to an objective standard, but rather the internal interpretations of another person. Because guess what? The testimony is going to be on most of these cases, which is, this language is hurtful, it hurt me because XYZ. Great, that can all be true, but guess what? All you have to find is the person who can be the most offended. All you have to find is the person who will be the most triggered, and then you can use them as character witnesses and basically, or not necessarily character witnesses, just witnesses, and say, okay, well, this is obviously hateful speech because it made a person feel a certain way. You are leaving this issue up to the subjective internal feelings of somebody else, and that is not the way to go about it, especially because it can then be weaponized in cases where people should actually be pointing out things that are happening in the UK and calling out the rioters, and then saying, well, hey, even pointing it out causes some people to be discomforted. It is hateful rhetoric. It's trying to spur on more hate between the races. And no, we just can't have it. You can see how this line keeps getting blurred. And let's be clear, we have to keep fighting here in America all the time. There are free speech zones on public universities which receive public funds, and obviously there is some controversy there, which is, even if it's a public university, technically you can get away with this sort of thing. At the end of the day, it's receiving public money, it's receiving funds from the federal government, and it should have to live up to the same standards of anything that is being funded by the federal government, any agency. So these sort of things happen in the United States. That's my point. It's not that, oh, we're perfect over here. We have to fight for our right to free speech all the time. But once again, you look at the UK, or even this next article that I'm going to bring in from National Review, from the European Union and some of its bureaucrats over there, it is a slope that is very, very hard to come back from. So, like I said, this one comes from National Review. And the headline reads, European tech regulator threatens to punish Elon Musk X for airing Trump interview. So I understand that over there across the pond, maybe some people don't like Trump. Probably a lot of people don't like Trump. Even the conservatives probably don't like Trump, because a conservative over there is at the most probably a moderate here. And obviously there are exceptions. I'm making a very broad generalization, so you can point out all the people that are from the UK that are more to the right than some of the moderates here in America. But generally, the party structure there, the conservatives in most of the countries are probably somewhere around where the moderates are in America, if not a little bit to the left, and the left are pretty far off to the left, with maybe a few like tinges of social conservatism. And what I mean by that is like by European standards, because at the end of the day, if you're shifting the Overton window to the left a little bit, you got to tighten it up, because there's only so far you can go before you start getting into full-on socialism and totalitarianism, even though you do see some socialist parties there, and I'm not going to claim there are any totalitarian parties there, but that's beyond the pale of our conversation. What we want to focus on here is what this other regulator is saying for having Donald Trump on a platform. Basically, he's saying, no. Half, actually, I believe the quote he uses is 1/3 of your base, 1/3 of the people that listen to this content, or at least 1/3 of the people that use your platform are for the European Union. So you have to abide by our laws and not allow on hateful people and engage in conversations that spread this sort of hateful language. So one, they are inherently from the very beginning claiming that Donald Trump is a person who will spread hateful rhetoric, who is not good for public speech. So basically ban Donald Trump from speaking. That's basically what he's getting at. And yes, I understand I'm using general terms. I'm not quoting him directly, but that's basically what he's implying. This person will spread divisiveness, therefore he's not allowed to speak. What does that mean for a politician that is outside the normal system, a person in Europe who sees things a little bit more differently. He's trying to pull the parties back a little bit to the right, and they say, no, some of his language is actually hateful. We actually can't go back to a system where we have sovereign borders and we're no longer considered just a union. That's a little bit too far for us. That's too far outside the mainstream. That's divisive. So we're just not going to allow that kind of speech. This is what happens when you just wholesale label people divisive, and then you can shut their speech down entirely because you don't want to hear them. And maybe they have maybe they have a very, very good argument for why this person is divisive. I'm not even going to deny that that's possible. But when you allow this sort of just general labeling and then saying that person's not allowed to speak because of it, you get into some really, really messy territory. And are you actually allowing people to participate in your democracy if you're saying your opinion is so far outside of what is acceptable, we won't even let you speak to other people? I understand there are obvious exceptions to this on moral levels, but when it comes to legitimate questions of policy making and even, I would say, some rhetorical choices as well, you just can't. You can't. Okay? I'm sorry. At the end of the day, you cannot allow the people who you disagree with to be banned. Even, like I said, even if you hate Trump, you cannot agree that, he's just not allowed to speak because he's too divisive. Because guess what? 30 years down the road, when another party is in power and they say, you know what, that person, Bernie Sanders, no, he's too divisive, man. He's talking about empowering unions and trying to rip money away from the wealthy class. No, that's too divisive, man. They will shut that down too because the precedent has been set. At the end of the day, do not let this be something that you fall for no matter how much you do not like somebody else. You should want everybody else to be able to speak. You should, at the end of the day, fight a tyrannical government in order to ensure everybody's right to speak, even if you disagree with them. It's a really weird way to rephrase that old famous quote. I don't agree with what you're saying, but I will die for your right to say it. But it's very, very true. So I'm going to read one quote from it, and then we'll move on to our last article. Quote, as the individual entity ultimately controlling a platform with over 300 million users worldwide, of which 1/3 are in the EU, that has been designated as a very large online platform, you have the legal obligation to ensure X's compliance with EU law, and in particular, the DSA in EU, Brenton wrote in a letter to Elon Musk shared on X on Monday. This notably means ensuring, on the one hand, that freedom of expression and information, including media freedom and pluralism, are effectively protected. On the other hand, that all proportionate and effective mitigation measures are put in place regarding the amplification of harmful content in connection with relevant events, including live streamings, which, if unaddressed, might increase the risk profile of X and generate detrimental effects on civil discourse and public security. Okay, so don't let this person onto your platform. Don't let these sort of ideas onto your platform because it will hurt public security. Maybe that's true. And I honestly think it's a little bit overblown, but even if I was to accept it, even if that is true, let's take it as true. Do you want to live in a society where we only care about protecting everything as is, or do you want to live in a society where we can grow, change, and kind of push the boundaries and actually risk some things? Maybe some ideas are a little bit crazy. They sound bad compared to the mainstream, and yet they actually turn out to be a good thing. Globalism, the domination of the idea that the world will unite as one, there is a United Nations that oversees the entire world, while it hasn't been exactly exemplified, or how should I say, hasn't been spoken about in this fashion, it is the inevitable end of a true globalist perspective, which is there will be no nations, there will be no national borders. Maybe, even though it's outside the open window of the controlling classes across the world, sovereignty is actually important, and there's actually a very good case to make in order to have the governing units that oversee people smaller so that they can be more in touch with the people that they are governing. Maybe that idea, which once again, it's hard to believe sometimes. It is probably outside the norm of a lot of the globalist movement. And I'm not trying to be like, oh, the globalists. I'm saying that there was a very concerted effort and there was a great turn towards the U.S. as a world hegemonic power and looking out to the rest of the world to follow suit, and more empowerment to the UN and giving up a little bit of national sovereignty here and there. There was definitely a slip towards it. And obviously, across the world in all nations is not the same, but maybe the idea that national sovereignty in a strong nation as opposed to a strong global community, it's a little bit outside the norm. It's not necessarily what people were going to. Maybe they haven't fully articulated it yet, but they were going that way. And that seems unacceptable. Maybe it's going to cause a little bit of public unrest. Maybe some people are not going to like it. Maybe they're going to call it hateful. But maybe there is something to it. I'm not going to go through the argument about globalism versus a more national approach, a more sovereign state approach. I'm not going to go through and argue either side. What I'm saying is there's definitely at least a valid argument to it, and there are good bases behind it. And to pretend as though that, oh, well, it's going to disturb the social safety net. It's going to just, not the social safety net, the social fabric, in order to even bring this up, is to completely dismiss a logically thought out and well-argued point of view simply because you don't like it and you're not willing to take on the risk of asserting that these ideas should be allowed, even if they are not something that is 100% acceptable to the mainstream. Okay, so that's enough on that. I'm sorry that I took so long on those two articles. I'm going to just leave it there. Honestly, I was going to do another article about supply chains. I will insert it in next episode because, like I said, I want to leave enough time for you to go watch 6 and 6. The first one is 6 minutes. The plan from now on is to not actually have the episode itself be less than 6 minutes. It's to have all of the stories done in 6 minutes. We'll see how that goes. It depends on how quickly I can put it in there while also trying to distill all the information that's important. The first episode actually went really well, so maybe I can make all of them in under 6 minutes, but, we'll see. We'll see, because the first one's actually 6 minutes in 1 second, so technically I've already violated that, but the whole intent was to have all the stories done in 6 minutes and have the fluff on the outside, like and subscribe, like I'm going to ask you now. If you want to check out today's articles, there's a link in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, as well as Podvine, and the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where, yes, I will still be posting the Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. So on Tuesday and Thursday, you get a double dose. You actually get somewhere around like 16 minutes of content. You can watch the Twitter tirade, just me ranting about random things. I mean, this week we were talking about Kamala, the blank slate, and also Joe Biden's legacy. Actually, when this goes out, the Joe Biden legacy one, I believe, is the one I was posting first. I'm recording those ahead of time. So maybe you'll just have that one over there on the Twitter if you're listening on the day of. But anytime after that, you'll be able to find the other one about Kamala there posted on Thursday. So with all that self-promotion out of the way, like I said, thank you for anybody that's been here for this long. I appreciate it. We're going to keep on trucking. We're going to try to get this content out very, very consistently. It's a new schedule, so you may have to work with me. The time that I'm posting it may be a little bit later, but the idea is that it'll always come out. All right, so with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.